Hello, this is Ken Ferry with this week's Boots in the Field report. Good to be back in the saddle after our fishing trip. For those of you who are wondering about the Canadian exchange rate, it is good. We got a lot of Canadian fish for our American dollar. The weather was good, no smoke where we were, and the fishing and the people were great. Reports and pictures coming in of frost in northeast Iowa last week with low temperatures in the mid to upper 30s. This was kind of a repeat of what we saw last fall when the frost hit us and temperatures were not below freezing. When the dew point and the temperatures meet and the skies are clear and there's no wind, you can have frost. We'll have to see how much damage it did. Maybe we'll get more pictures in this week. The drought map continues to get uglier and bigger. This water shortage has captured the whole Midwest. All of the I states are looking for water. Do your scouting early. Before 10 o'clock, you'll feel better about your crop. Our April planted corn is in that rapid growth stage, and the May planted corn will be there this week. In that rapid growth stage, we can put on an inch of root a day and a new leaf collar about every 90 heat units. This is the window where nitrogen uptake can reach 6 to 7 pounds a day or more. The corn is also brittle, so don't let the winds get it. As we crisscross the customer base, there is a lot of variability in the crop appearance. Some of the fields are soldiering on in uniform, and others are getting rougher looking as the days go by. The sins of spring are coming back to haunt us. Other years, we could have multiple sins and get away with it. In dry years, a single sin can get us in trouble. Compaction, wheel tracks are becoming visible from the road. Corn in that wheel track is growing slow while the other plants are growing fast. Fields that looked somewhat uniform before the rapid growth stage are now showing us where the sins are. Fields with compaction are rolling earlier and they're staying rolled longer. Doing service calls on fields showing prolonged carbon penalty issues. Growers sidedressed the fields a week ago and they still haven't greened up. The problem is the nitrogen is still in a band in the middle of the row. We need rain to move it in the root zone. Even Y-drop N at the base of the plant needs some water to move it down. We don't have enough humidity to get the stem water in most cases. The carbon penalty is showing up out there as both sulfur and nitrogen deficiencies. So the yellow whorls with the striping are the sulfur. Yellow plants from the base up are going to be your nitrogen deficiency. Now, it's not uncommon to have both out there, a sulfur and an N deficiency going on at the same time during the carbon penalty. And of course, this is a lot higher in the corn on corn or corn planted into rye cover. It's important, though, to diagnose what it is because the fix is different. If your corn is showing a deficiency of either one of those nutrients, sulfur or nitrogen right now, as it goes into that rapid growth stage, we need to rework your 4R program. Carrying too much nitrogen or sulfur to the sidedress window can get you in trouble in dry years. Now, we should be sidedressing August grain filling sulfur and nitrogen, not plant building nitrogen. As a rule of thumb, somewhere around 50 to 70% of that N needs to be on the front end, and we bring the balance back in the sidedressing. The carbon penalty, of course, is a bigger challenge in corn on corn or corn planted into rye cover due to the carbon load. Now, we can't do much about it now but pray for rain, but we can rethink how we protect these acres going forward by changing our 4R program. Other fields look somewhat uniform in color and height from the road, but when you get out in them, the plant height varies a lot. When you count the collars, the short corn is at the same stage of growth as the tall corn. These plants are indicating stress, which it's stacking the internodes, and those stacking of those internodes on those shorter plants is going to lead to uneven ear height. When we get out there in August, you're going to see the ear height on the plant moving up and down. It's going to be on the same node, but the nodes are stacked on those plants. This could be caused by several problems, but most of them are related to crown root development as I dig in these fields. We have 5 sets of crown roots. Crown roots will not develop in the air, so if you plant too shallow or leave the slot open, and they won't develop in dry soil. Doing root digs in these fields, the taller plants have 3 sets of crown roots. The 4th and the 5th have been caught in this dry surface soil. The smaller plants have only the 1st and the 2nd set of crown roots. The 3rd is caught in the dry soil. The first 3 sets of crown roots are the big dogs, right? They're the ones that are going to do all the work. The 3rd is the moneymaker, and they're going to keep this crop on track. Now, the 4th and the 5th are important more in standability than they are in crop development or nutrient uptake. The brace roots are firing off early in many fields, and these will help stabilize this crop. A lot of those brace roots are firing off right there at the ground line. Now, the brace roots can grow into dry soil or air, which will help this crop. Plan on this year's crop being shorter with closer internodes. Now, crop height has little to do with yield, and shorter plants tend to stand better. Some fields, some soil types, the furrow is cracking open. Fields where that furrow has been closed for a month and a half, maybe 2, and now it's cracking open as the soil dries out. Of course, we're talking about the soils with more clay in it. The furrow is kind of like a score mark on concrete that cracks after the concrete dries out. Like knife tracks, for instance, when we're sidedressing, sometimes it will crack right down that knife or that coulter track. This open furrow creates a rootless corn syndrome where plants will want to flop around in that slot. If possible, in the later planted fields, if the corn's not too big, row crop cultivation will help them. Now, it usually takes 2 passes. One pass, you're going slow and you're creating loose soil. The second pass, you're going at a higher speed and you're going to roll that soil up around the base of the plant. When we roll that soil around the base of the plant, this will cover up the open slot and it will trigger the brace roots to fire. And when we get rain, the crown roots will fire as well. Now, you guys on the pivots, you may be checking your dry land corners in this case, and it may be worthwhile just cultivating the dry land corners. Now, I realize this means we must find a row crop cultivator and someone old enough to run it. On the soybean front, our early beans are starting to step out. A lot of growers have been on the flower watch and sending in pictures of beans flowering from May 27th on, with a lot of them showing up in the first 2 weeks of June. Now, flower initiation is triggered by night length. When the flowers actually show up is tied to growing conditions in GDUs. So some of you may notice that we started out flowering and we seem to have slowed down. We're slowing down the actual development of the crop, and that's slowing down how soon you'll see those flowers. The later planted beans, those that were planted in May, are still caught up in the carbon penalty and dry conditions, and this has caused them to stall out. In the last 2 weeks, some of these beans have hardly moved at all. And if you have earlier planted beans in the same field, you kind of notice that the difference that's taken place. One is stalled out and one is taking off. This year will go down in the books as a year with a lot of carryover issues within our customer base. The carryover issues in the corn have somewhat subsided as the roots get deeper and they grow away from the herbicide zone. The amount of carryover issues from last year's corn program in this year's soybeans continues to create a lot of service calls. If you add compaction layer to the mix to keep the bean roots shallow, caught in that herbicide zone, it amplifies the problem. This problem goes back to the dry June we had last year, not allowing that herbicide to break down or break its half-life down in that first 30 days. So it lengthens its overall presence in the soil. In these conditions, these dry conditions of last June, a 10-month rotation just isn't quite long enough for some of these herbicides. Now, growers are wondering, with this June being drier than last June, will we have the same issue next year where we've used the same products? The answer is yes, especially if next May is as dry as what we've seen this year and we have slow-growing roots. We need to be careful going forward to keep compaction layers out of the bean fields. That will help. And we can do some window grow outs in March to get a feel for how big this problem will be. While the disease issues in the corn are non-existent at this stage, we are seeing rhizoctonia root rot in the beans. Now, rhizoctonia is usually a wet period followed by a hot, dry period that triggers the infection. It usually takes out a foot or two of row, spreading to multiple plants, unlike, let's say, phytophthora, where it's kind of more sporadic in the stand. While it is more likely with wet, hot conditions, you can replace the wet with stress. So in this case, stress and hot. So dry conditions, carryover, compaction can all stress this plant and these warm soils and trigger the root rot. This will be visible below ground. As you look at that taproot, it'll show the rot, and the plant will start to wilt in this heat and eventually die. Now, with that, if you do get a rain, you can fire off new roots above that rotted area on the taproot, and the plant can actually rebound if the rain is in time. So plants can be wilted one day and make a comeback the next with rain. The window, though, from wilt to comeback is pretty small. In some areas, we have wheat that has gone flat. Lodge wheat is typical kind of function of too much population or too much nitrogen. This is a problem with the wheat on manured ground or your overlap zones where the manured ground would be releasing too much nitrogen or your population got too high. This typical type of lodging from too much N usually has a pattern to it. You can see streaks in the field, or again, you can see the high population overlap zones on the N. This year's flat wheat has no patterns. We see it in wheat after corn, and we see it in wheat after beans without manure. This wheat is not lodged, though, as far as the plant's laying over. The stems have broken or kinked over. The only common denominator I can see is the location of the fields where this is taking place. Most of the problem fields are in the same area where we had the freeze this spring that took out soybeans and blew corn off at the ground line. After talking with Phil Needham, I believe we got stem damage on this wheat from that night in the upper 20s that damaged the stems, and we just didn't catch it at that time. The bigger the wheat at the time, which is around April 24th, the bigger the problem. Other areas had more cloud cover that night and a breeze, and we didn't see the damage to the beans. When we didn't see the damage to the beans, I don't seem to have near the amount of concerns about flat wheat, and I think it's, again, stem damage. Now, this is not typically lodged wheat. Again, as you look at it, it's not wheat laying over. It's stems that are kinked. And based on the time that it took place, I expect this to be a substantial hit on yield and quality in these fields. You may need to harvest around the down areas if possible to protect the quality of your wheat sample. As we look forward to the wheat harvest and double cropping the beans, I think we have to be realistic. Without rain, if we don't have the moisture to germinate these beans, the ROI of the double crop is probably going to be kind of rough. On the insect front last week, we had guys replanting the outside rounds of the field and around the waterways due to cutworm damage in the non-GMO corn. The cutworm moved in from the grass edges. They were feeding below ground, going down the seed furrow and boring holes right through the crown like a wireworm. These guys are bringing down V6 corn, which is usually safe from cutworms. Growers I talked to said matter of 2 or 3 days they wiped out 20, 30 rows from the grass edges and the waterways. Now because these cutworm are large and they're below ground, it's really hard to get to them with the spray. Now for you guys that did replant corn in those situations, if you went back in there and replanted non-GMO corn without using an insecticide, remember, cutworm are blowing in here year-round. So this replanted corn will need to be watched as well. Surprisingly, the armyworm reports have been light. Reports of armyworm in the hay crop, and after harvest they are seen moving across roads. And we are getting some reports of wheat heads getting clipped. I expect more issues to show up this week. We still have about 3 weeks to pay attention to armyworm, and we need to watch this wheat crop until harvest. So far, the pressure is lighter than the traps would indicate. Maybe this dry weather has influenced their survival. We're now able to see rootworm feeding and larvae in the corn. And if you get bored and want to start doing your rootworm floats, they could start this week or next. On the spider mite front, I am still seeing some spider mite predators out there. The thrips, the lacewings, and lady beetles. Normally I would say it's still okay to mow ditches, but as I watch these lawns brown up and the dry forecast, I think it's time to park these mowers. Or at least have a conversation with your landowners. Do you want mowed ditches or spider mites? You know, I see signs that say roadsides for wildlife. Maybe we need to make up road signs that say roadsides for spider mites. Your options for spider mite control have gotten narrower, but I'm told the supply is good. Pest teams, be watching those field edges. If we can border the fields early enough anyway, we could probably buy us some time to find the rain. These mites are going to spread from the grass edges. Our soil testing crews are wrapping up the summer testing this week and will be ready to test the wheat acres as the wheat acres get harvested. So don't forget to call them in to the office as harvest starts. We have started the farm visits with the farmer clients, so Janine will be contacting you, like always, to schedule your farm visits. Farm members, as well as customers at our retail locations, can sign up for our virtual farm visit, which is new this year, and which will be starting here in early July. If you want more information on a virtual farm visit, check it out on our website or just call the office. Registration for the 2023 Farm Journal Corn Soybean College is open, which will be held July 25th and 26th. One of the things I enjoy about Corn College and the attendees rate high is the opportunity to visit with farmers from all over the country. It's early in the registration, but it looks like this year is going to be no different. Along with good registration from the Midwest, we have people registering from Maryland to California, from Kansas to Missouri to Kentucky. We even have a registration from Australia. I expect this diversity to continue to grow as the registration goes on. Check out the agenda and the opening promotion on our website. Go to croptechconsulting.com and click on the Corn College tab. Growers have been asking, how much is this dry weather affecting yield? My standard answer has always been, if the corn crop is still growing at night, there is more stress on the farmer than the crop. As we learn more about hybrid characteristics, we now know L1 hybrids might be shortening up their ear in this dry weather. And that could lead to a yield decrease, especially if they don't have the ability to pick up kernel depth, is what we call a D hybrid. But for the most part, this crop is still moving in most places. Bubba up at Helena and Grand Ridge is measuring 2.5 inches of growth in 24 hours. I would suggest more of you do that. Pick a fence post or marker as reference and watch this crop progress. Check it in the morning. Do your scouting in the morning. Let this crop protect itself in the afternoon. But as you're able to document growth, we'll take some of the emotion out of the situation. Is this crop really hurt or not? Now, in some of the driest areas, in the lighter soil types, the corn has stopped growing at night, and this will be pulling back on yield. Now, this is the reason why we pull those populations back in your VRT program where you're VRTing your population. We're trying to better allocate the water in those lighter soils. Less plants, more water to go around. If your light soils are going backwards, you may give some thought in the future to pulling their populations back. Take a look at VRT population. Many bean fields have stalled out in the carbon penalty, drought, carryover, whatever you want to see that's going out there. Here too, it's not time to throw in the towel. With the career of doing soybean stress plots, we have burned them, we have mowed them, we have rolled them, we've even tore them up with weed whackers. It's amazing how they many times will respond or be stimulated by stress. Bean yields are made in August. As the stress of this season drones on for everyone, we need to stay engaged. When growers call in and they're wondering if they should even sidedress if it's not going to rain, and I ask a question like, how's the stand? And they would answer, it might be the best stand I've ever had. How does the corn look? Well, it looks good till about 10 o'clock. In this case, coffee shop emotion is taken over and they're thinking about throwing in the towel. Why would you pull back now? You never walk away from a growing crop. I want everyone to keep their heads up. Yeah, we're taking some hits this year. But that's when the professionals step up to their game. Throwing in the towel now because you don't think this crop is going to be any good kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Sorry about the long podcast, but it's kind of a twofer. To stay up to date, check out our website at croptechinc.com and subscribe to our podcast, Boots in the Field Report. Keep her safe, keep her moving.